Hi, everybody. Today's Tuesday, June 24th, 2025, and our friend Ambassador Chas Freeman is back with us. Welcome back, Ambassador.
Glad to be with you, Nima.
Let's talk about what's going on in the Middle East. Donald Trump, last night, he announced that there's going to be a ceasefire between Iran and Israel. And we know that in the initial hours, Israelis attacked Iran. Then, in the final minutes of the ceasefire coming in effect, Iran attacked Israel. And here is what Donald Trump said finally about the ceasefire.
The fact that Israel unloaded right after we made the deal. They didn't have to unload. And I didn't like the fact that the retaliation was very strong. But in all fairness, Israel unloaded a lot. And now I hear Israel just went out because they felt it was violated by one rocket that didn't land anywhere. That's not what we want, I'll tell you. And I'm telling you, I'm not happy about that, Israel, either. All I do is play both sides.
Yeah. What has happened, Ambassador?
Well, there's no ceasefire agreement. That's a misnomer. Essentially, the sequence of events was Israel carried out an unprovoked attack on Iran. Iran responded, but Iran said it would stop its response, it would halt its retaliation and cease fire, in effect, if Israel stopped attacking it. So basically, there was an Iranian offer on the table to cease fire. And Mr. Trump then spoke with Mr. Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, and I think probably quite forcefully urged him to reciprocate the Iranian offer. So why did Netanyahu do that? Because despite the international press coverage, which has minimized the damage done to Israel by the Iranian reprisals and maximized the damage done to Iran, Israel has suffered quite a bit from this bombardment, and it has become more effective as time went on, as the Israeli defense capability was degraded, and as Israel began to run out of interceptors for Iranian missiles, at the same time that Iran was firing its most modern missiles, which it had not done in the early phases of the exchange. So the Iranians obviously had an interest in maximizing views of their suffering because they're the victim. So this is good propaganda to show that you're being savaged by your enemy. The Israelis, as the perpetrator, as the attacker, the aggressor, wanted to minimize the recognition of the suffering they were undergoing. But we have lots of evidence that that suffering was quite considerable. Not only did a large number of Israelis flee Israel for neighboring countries, Egypt is now trying to round up people who went into the Sinai vacation spots en route to Europe or the United States or some other refuge. Many people managed to get out to Cyprus. This is despite the Israelis banning departures by their citizens. And Ben Gvir, the fascist minister of security, declared that watching Al Jazeera should be made a crime, which means that he's trying to cover something up. And indeed, this has been the case. In any event, there's no ceasefire agreement. There was an Iranian offer of a ceasefire, which Mr. Trump pocketed. He then persuaded Israel that it was time to stop the attacks. Israel was easily persuaded because it was, in fact, in the process of losing more and more in the exchange. So we have, I just would say finally that there is a general misportrayal of all this in the Western media, which is pro-Israeli and which takes the tactical success of Israel's very ingenious attack on Iran on June 13th for a strategic success. But it was not a strategic success. Iran removed the enriched uranium from its locations in Fordow and other places. It's dispersed it to safekeeping. The Iranian scientists at the senior level has been badly damaged. Sorry about that. The senior level has been badly damaged, but Iran has a depth of scientific and technological talent, and the knowledge of how to run a nuclear program has not dissipated. So the nuclear program has not, as Mr. Trump claimed, been obliterated. It has been set back, perhaps, but not very much. So the strategic aims of Israel, which had been regime change in Iran, have not been realized. Destruction of the nuclear program has not been realized. And instead of that, Iranian politics seem to me, as an outsider, to have moved to the right. That is to say, the advocates of a nuclear weapon now have a stronger position in Iranian politics. And so once again, we will see what usually happens, which is that regime change efforts produce worse regimes than the ones that they are trying to get rid of. We've seen this repeatedly throughout history, and I don't think Iran is an exception. So what happens now is really a big question, and it's something we should discuss.
We had an interview that former Secretary of State of Obama, John Kerry, he had an interview with Christian Amanpour in which he said that the main objective should be to negotiate with Iranians instead of hitting Iranian nuclear facilities, because it's about the knowledge. It's not about the physical things to be destroyed. It's something beyond that. And he wasn't sure if the Trump administration would understand this sort of concept.
Well, I don't know what they understand and what they don't, but I think John Kerry is correct. You cannot obliterate a nuclear program by blowing up physical facilities or even by murdering a few scientists. And you do need to negotiate. And here we have a problem because the Iranian parliament, in addition to firing a warning flare over the possible closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which of course immediately put insurance rates up for shipping and reduced shipping through the strait, made it more difficult and boosted the price of oil. I don't think Iran had any intention of actually closing the Strait of Hormuz, and if it did, it would be for a very brief period, just to demonstrate that it could close it, because Iran itself would not be able to export oil if the Strait of Hormuz were firmly closed. In any event, we now have a number of questions. Will Iran remain in the Non-Proliferation Treaty? We've heard Araghchi very correctly say, the foreign minister of Iran say very correctly, that the Non-Proliferation Treaty provides no benefits, no protection to Iran. And indeed, Iran is entitled under the NPT to engage in enrichment, but the Israeli position, which Mr. Trump has adopted belatedly, is that there can be no enrichment in Iran. We also don't know what the future relationship with the International Atomic Energy Agency will be. The IAEA has Mario Grossi, the head of it, has called for Iran to allow IAEA inspectors to inspect the enriched uranium. But I think, and determine where it is. But I think that is very unlikely to be accepted for a number of reasons. First, of course, the IAEA has a history of leaking information to Israel, and indeed, it is widely believed that Israel's ability to assassinate Iranian nuclear engineers, scientists, was because the IAEA informed Israel who they were, and they were able to find out where they lived and so forth. So it's very unlikely that Iran would want to continue to cooperate with the IAEA in any event. But of course, if they did show the enriched uranium to the IAEA, they would have to expect that Israel would instantly know where it was. So I think the question of whether there will be any inspection regime in the future is a big one. And that brings me to the question of negotiations. There was no negotiation for this so-called ceasefire. It was simply pocketing an Iranian position and then negotiating something with Israel. But we don't know, by the way, we don't know what Mr. Trump may or may not have promised Israel in exchange for its halting the attacks on Iran. Will there be another negotiation? There are now two examples that Iran has recently experienced of Mr. Trump appearing to endorse negotiations only because they served as a cover for surprise attack. And I think Iran will be very reluctant to go back to the negotiating table with the United States. Who else might deal with this? Well, Arakchi, of course, met, I think, Sunday in Geneva with some Europeans, the British, French, and Germans. They opened a dialogue with Iran about the war. Why they opened it with Iran, not Israel, is a strange thing, because Iran didn't start the war. Iran had made it clear it didn't want a war, and it was prepared to end the exchanges of missiles and aircraft that whenever Israel did. But they didn't meet with Israel. They instead took Israel's side. So are they useful as negotiating partners if the United States has discredited itself? I doubt it. So I think Iran will remain open to talking to the United States and the Europeans, but I'm not sure that will extend to actually agreeing to a negotiation. Because the final point is this: Mr. Trump's stated objective in both the negotiation and in the bombing was the unconditional surrender of Iran. And no Iranian nationalist or patriot could possibly agree to that. So I think we're in a very uncertain stage. Finally, I know that, I started off by talking about the desire of Israel to conceal battle damage, the desire of Iran to publicize it. We don't know what the battle damage was on both sides. I mean, there have been Israeli claims which are probably exaggerated about the damage done to Iran. There have been Iranian claims similarly about Israel, which may or may not be exaggerated. We know that enough Israelis were shaken by this that they left the country. I wonder how many will actually now seek residence abroad rather than returning to Israel. And we're left with a situation in which Iran has successfully demonstrated to Israel that it can and will retaliate, and therefore it has an effective deterrent in the future. I mean, it may have been weakened militarily, and almost certainly has been, but it has established a deterrent. It also has shown the United States, even though it pulled its punches and warned the United States before it attacked Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, it has shown the United States that it is willing to strike directly at American bases in the region if necessary. The United States has shown that it's willing to be enlisted by Israel in attacks on Iran. Israel's probably learned a lesson. It's the first time it has been subjected to its own medicine, the medicine it hands out freely to Lebanese, Palestinians in Gaza, and Syrians or Yemenis. That is to say, Israelis have learned to live under falling bombs, which is not an experience that they will enjoy any more than Palestinians, Lebanese, Syrians, or Yemenis have. So this is quite a sea change. I do want to bring this I apologize for the extensive comments, but I think there's another dimension here, and that is the whole NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty framework in international law, like international law itself, have been gravely damaged by this. I think the pressure will now be on many countries to develop a nuclear weapon as a deterrent, because the example of North Korea appears to suggest that if you have a nuclear deterrent, you will not be attacked. But if you don't, you will be attacked. And therefore, I think those countries that have been considering in Europe, in the Middle East, in East Asia, that have been considering building a bomb now have a powerful argument for doing so. And of course, it goes without saying that the unprovoked attack by Israel on Iran was a gross violation of the United Nations Charter and international law, and so was the attack by the United States, which was equally unprovoked. So not much is left of the post-World War II effort to build a stable peace in the world. And I don't think we know what will happen next.
Here is what J.D. Vance said in terms of the outcome of what has happened between the United States and Israel on one side and Iran on the other side.
For Israel, think about this. They've accomplished an important military objective. They've helped us destroy the Iranian nuclear program. They've also destroyed the conventional missile capability of Iran that threatened the country of Israel. For the Iranians, I think this is a new opportunity to actually pursue the path of peace. As I said yesterday, what the Iranians have showed through their support of terror networks, through their now failed effort to build a nuclear weapon, is that they're just not very good at war. And I think the president really hit the reset button and said, look, let's actually produce long-term peace for the region. That's always been his goal. I actually think when we look back, we will say the 12-day war was an important reset moment for the entire region.
That's about the biggest bucket of spin I've heard in a long time. Energizing terrorist networks, really. I think the terrorism was conducted by Israel and its agents inside Iran. Assassinations are generally, and phone calls to Iranian nuclear scientists threatening them and their families if they didn't immediately capitulate. Destroying the Iranian nuclear program? No, that has not happened. Destroying the Iranian missile force? No, that has not happened. There's no indication that Iran was running out of missiles, unlike Israel, which was running out of interceptors. So I think that is, as I said, a giant bucket of, I will say, spin instead of something else.
Ambassador, we learned from, I don't know if you saw the reports, the new study at Harvard, they found Israel disappeared nearly 400,000 Palestinians in Gaza in this new study. I don't know what do we need to act upon, because it's all there. Everybody can see it. Can everybody see the devastation, the destruction in Gaza? I don't know what are we hesitating in doing something substantial. Many people right now, before you comment on that, many people are criticizing Iran because they agreed to go to a ceasefire, or maybe some sort of ceasefire, without bringing the case of Gaza, because these people want Iran to connect the case of Iran, the war between Iran and Israel, to the case of Gaza.
Well, this morning, I believe 80 Palestinian people seeking food in Gaza were murdered by the Israelis deliberately. The horrors in Gaza continue. The one positive thing from the Israeli point of view about the war with Iran is that it took all the attention off the genocide in Gaza for a time. But I think it's coming back. Israel's done its reputation no good by attacking Iran. It has simply consolidated an image of unrelenting evil and disregard for the lives of other human beings, even as it privileges its own. There are many questions being asked, not so much about Iran, because what Iran has done is essentially return to the status quo before the Israeli attack. That is, the Iranian position on Palestine has been consistent, hasn't changed. Iran's ability to do anything about Palestine is limited, as we know. That is not the case in the West. The West has the ability to end the impunity of Israel for its misbehavior. And there are questions being raised in the United States, for example, about why did Mr. Trump not insist on a ceasefire in Gaza at the same time as he insisted on a ceasefire with Iran? And the answer to that is unknown. But you know, there is a clear double standard here. Everybody can see it. In Ukraine, if a child dies under Russian attack, this is a horror and immediately denounced. In Gaza, where many children die every day under Israeli attack, not a word is said. So what is the explanation for this? Partly Islamophobia, that is, you know, a perverse image of Islam in the West and opposition to Muslims generally and devaluation of Muslim and Palestinian lives, partly racism, partly the legacy of Western supremacy in the world, which is gone now, but which the West continues to hang on to, partly a militaristic approach, which Mr. Vance nicely encapsulated. You know, I mean, he sees this issue obviously in purely military terms. And when he says Iran should go on the road to peace, I wonder exactly what he's referring to. I'm not aware that Iran has started a war in modern history. I don't think the Iranian reign of terror that accompanied the Islamic Revolution and which led to the murder of some Iranian dissidents around the world and also severe repression of people inside Iran has extended to murdering Israelis. When was the last time you heard about that? Or for that matter, Americans? And it seems to me that Iran has actually burnished its reputation for statecraft by the way in which it handled the reprisal against Al-Udeid Air Base in Qatar. That is to say, as it had done earlier with an attack on Ain al-Assad in the air base in Iraq in reprisal for Israeli and American misdeeds. It notified the United States ahead of time that it was attacking and asked that we get our people out of the way so nobody would be killed. In fact, the first round of exchanges between Israel and Iran also was warned. Iran also warned Israel and the United States for the same purpose. So I don't think Iran has a reputation internationally of the sort that our vice president attributes to it. That may be the stereotype in the United States, but it is not widely shared beyond our borders.
Can you comment on how close Iran was to reach nuclear weapons? Because the excuse on the part of the Trump administration in terms of attacking Iran, bombing Iran, is the way that they were so close to achieve nuclear weapons. Before commenting on, here is what J.D. Vance said.
It was profound and difficult to accomplish.
Do you think
the elimination of the Iranian nuclear program, and I think the president successfully did that. You're asking, were the Iranians close to a nuclear weapon? Brett, they were very close to a nuclear weapon. And what I'd encourage my fellow Americans to think about here is that a week ago, the Iranians were quite close to achieving a nuclear weapon. Now, they cannot build a nuclear weapon. That is the biggest testament to the president's leadership and to the success of our mission. In 1 week, without, thank God so far, not losing a single American casualty, we have taken what was a threatening nuclear program that could have destabilized the entire world. Now that program is gone. We did it through effective presidential leadership and also some very, very competent work from our troops.
Yeah, your take.
Well, first of all, it is absolutely correct that Iran has enriched uranium to the 60% level. And since this is a logarithmic function, that's very close to the 90% level required to build a nuclear weapon. So the nuclear material itself was probably away, at most a week or two away from being enriched to the weapons grade. That is correct. Mr. Vance does not provide any indication of why that was the case. We had an agreement called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action by which Iran limited its enrichment, was under serious inspection. IAEA says it has no indication that Iran made a decision to build a bomb. But what it did do was escalate the level of enrichment after Trump tore up the agreement, as part of leverage on the United States and the global community. It got very close to the point where it could make a decision to build a nuclear weapon. However, having a uranium on hand is not enough. You have to build a warhead that can fit on a missile or be dropped by an aircraft. Iran doesn't have much of an air force, so we're basically talking about a ballistic missile. That is a serious engineering problem. It isn't something you can do overnight. No doubt there's been some modeling of this done in Iran, but I think we're talking, probably a couple of years to actually mount an effective nuclear weapon on a warhead. There's a joke going around on the internet that there's been an archaeological discovery in Israel. They found a tablet written in ancient Hebrew dating 3,000 years ago that said Iran was only 2 months away from building a nuclear weapon. Frankly, the intelligence on which this rests and which Mr. Vance was relying upon to justify his praise of his boss's conduct and decisions was supplied by Mossad. And it was, and Mr. Trump explicitly said he believed Israel rather than his own intelligence people. And his own intelligence people, the intelligence community in the United States, continues to take the position that Iran has not made a decision. I don't know what their position is on the various engineering difficulties that I've mentioned, but I think there was no urgency about this. This was a pretext for an attack that we now know Mr. Netanyahu began to plan last fall. The components of it, the infiltration of armed drones, the placement of agents, the collection of information on the whereabouts and of the nuclear scientists and generals and so forth in Iran has been laid in place over years. Mr. Netanyahu has had several decades of constant urging to attack, to do what he just did. He's had a big success in one sense. He actually got the United States to join him. But as it turned out, the United States joined him only in a performative sense. That is, the United States bombed empty warehouses and a mountain that was too deep to penetrate. And it bombed Fordo, apparently, judging by satellite photography of truck traffic in the few days preceding this attack by the United States, was essentially evacuated. That is, the centrifuges and any uranium that was there were taken away and put somewhere else. Now, Iran has a very dispersed nuclear program because it's been under constant threat from Israel and the United States. It probably has other hideaways which nobody knows about and which are deep underground. where it can continue the work that the attack may have set back. I think the real issue here is not the physical destruction, which Mr. Vance completely overstates, but the question of intent. Iran has been given a powerful argument for making a decision it did not want to make to build a nuclear weapon. And we have in place an 86-year-old supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, who has been very cautious on this issue and kept the decision that the founder of the Islamic Republic, Khamenei, made, the fatwa that banned weapons of mass destruction as haram, forbidden in Islam. He's kept that in place. He is due to step down. If he's killed, he will obviously be replaced, but he's of an age where he should be, and apparently is planning his succession. And so we have a council of 88 elected people who will designate a successor. And there are arrangements for interim leadership by a sort of triumvirate in the Iranian constitution. So what leads anyone to think that the successor, Khamenei, will be as restrained and as devoted to the fatwa as he has proven? I think if you believe that, I would love to engage in a negotiation with you to get you to transfer all your wealth to me. You probably would agree. This is not a military issue. John Kerry is right. You cannot solve this with military use of force. And Mr. Trump's idea of negotiation is threats, ultimatum, and a demand for unconditional surrender. Well, people don't do that, especially not proud countries do not do that.
Vladimir Putin was asked during the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum if they're gonna, when Israel attacked Iran, he was asked by Russian reporters if Russia would help Iran in the fight against the United States and Israel. He said that we offered before to Iranian government that we're going to provide them with weapons, with whatever they need, but they reject. They had little interest in doing this, and they didn't want it. Do you think that this attack on Iran would change the decision makers, the mind of decision makers in Iran to make it to get closer to Russia?
I think they have no choice but to do that now. I think Khamenei is being criticized internally in Iran for not accepting the Russian offer of technology transfer and manufacturing assistance and equipment transfer to beef up Iran's air defenses. Now that those air defenses have been degraded, we don't know to what extent, but pretty clearly, we can't tell the U.S. bombers entered Iranian airspace, did their bombing, and left with no Iranian attempt to attack them. Well, that obviously Iran could have attacked them, but decided not to. So this was restrained on Iran's part. But I think now Iran has no choice. And here I had been thinking earlier, before Arakchi went to Moscow from Istanbul, and has had his conference with Vladimir Putin, and they're talking about a strengthened strategic relationship. I had thought even before that after the war ended, Iran would accept the offer that had been made, which it brushed aside from Russia, and it would also look to China for air defense. And I'm thinking about it in the case of the Chinese, who don't have the kind of relationship with Iran that Russia does now. I think it would be entirely within their, consistent with their thinking and their policy for them to provide some version of their air defense, perhaps similar to what they gave to Pakistan, which did very well against the Indian Air Force. Why? Because, first of all, the Israeli attack is an attack on the UN Charter. It's an attack on the sovereignty and territorial integrity, because apparently Israel has offered parts of Azerbaijan and Iran to Baku, the other Azerbaijan country. It's apparently assisted the Kurds. Over the years, it's probably involved with the Baluchis and maybe with the Arabs in Arabistan inside Iran. So this is the sort of thing that the Chinese deeply oppose on principle. They particularly oppose separatism because that's what they see at issue with the Taiwan issue. So, Israel proposing to detach parts of Iran, as long as it always wanted to do in Syria, to detach parts of Syria, is directly contrary to the Treaty of Westphalia concept that the Chinese have embraced, UN Charter, international law, and the national interest. And, basically, Israel has gotten away with what it has done because it has had Western backing that gave it impunity. And I think the world is now tired of Israeli impunity. And I would say also, I had thought before this, in September, the American control of Iraqi airspace will supposedly end. I think Iraq will turn to Russia or China, more likely China in Iraq's case, to build an effective air defense that would prevent Israel crossing its territory in future, as it did in this attack. So I think we're talking about a rearrangement of great power relations in the region. And I don't think either Russia or China have any interest in fighting the United States or Israel in West Asia. But they do have the capability, and I think they have the national interest to buttress the self-defense capabilities of Iran. And ironically, I can imagine the Chinese arguing that if the US feels free to buttress the self-defense capabilities of Taiwan, which is part of China in rebellion against the central government, why shouldn't they buttress the self-defense capabilities of an independent sovereign state like Iran or Iraq? So I think we're going down a road which has many, many forks in it. Some of them are nuclear, some are not. It's all very unpredictable at this point. The last point, since there really isn't a ceasefire agreement, there is a pause by Israel in its attacks on Iran, and therefore there's a pause in Iranian retaliation against Israel. How long is this ceasefire going to last? Generally speaking, ceasefires are very complicated matters. They require detailed agreement between the parties. There's no such meeting of the minds on this. I think we may be talking about, Israel will assert the right to resume the war at any moment that it chooses. Whether its only problem is that probably would evoke the opposition of Donald Trump. But I say probably evoke the opposition because nobody knows what Mr. Trump will do from moment to moment.
The war between Iran and Israel has changed, in my opinion, the situation of the Middle East. Nobody before Iran, after 8 years of the war between Iran and Iraqis attacked Iran, and Iran had to respond. For 8 years, they were fighting Iraqis, and right now, after that war, this is the first time Iran been attacked by Israel and the United States. But when it comes to Israeli attack, it was something different. They assumed that by this attack they can do regime change in Iran. they can do everything. They can change everything in Iran. Maybe because Netanyahu was talking about our Arab friends would like to have a regime change in Iran. We want it. Let's go after it. Let's do something about it. Do you think that plan has totally defeated, or do they really believe they can go after it again?
As I've said before, I think Israel's objective is absolute security for itself, which means absolute insecurity for everyone else. Or in other words, it wants to subjugate and subordinate everyone else to its command. So this is not over on the Israeli side. What the Israelis have learned is that they can be punished quite severely for this kind of behavior. But they have a record of doing outrageous things. The question is, can they still get away with them? And here, there are a couple of factors that are important. One is that I believe, as I said, that the balance in Iranian politics is shifting in favor of the more nationalist, less religious elements. Maybe the army is gaining in relation to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. I don't know the details, but I think Iran is going to be harder line rather than softer line in the future. Second, we've seen solidarity between the Gulf Arabs and, in fact, the entire Islamic world and Iran. When you have Mohammed bin Salman calling Khamenei or Pezeshkian and condemning Israel and offering solidarity and support, something important has happened. And here there's another element that we need to take account of, and that is, as I said, Iran has shown that it's not afraid to attack American bases on the soil of Gulf Arab countries. That's what the attack on Al Udeid means, even if it was restrained. Next time, perhaps it wouldn't be. So the question for the countries in the Gulf region now is the presence of an American base on your territory protection, or is it an invitation to attack? Is it an asset, or is it a liability? In the law, there is a concept called attractive nuisance. So if you have a swimming pool in your backyard and you don't put a fence around it, and a kid comes and drowns in it, you are responsible because you should have known that was a possibility. Well, are these bases now attractive nuisances? Should they be restricted or perhaps even expelled? I think this is a question that governments in the region will be asking. But what is very clear is that any possibility of an anti-Iranian coalition, with the possible exception of Syria, because Ashara is viscerally anti-Persian, is gone. There will be no such coalition. In fact, a coalition between Iran and the Gulf Arabs looks very possible to counter Israel. And here, Israel has outraged everybody, particularly in the Islamic world, but beyond that, with the genocide in Gaza, with the pogroms, with the misbehavior in the West Bank. We've just learned during this war that almost everything Israel has accused Hamas of doing, Israel itself has done, like burying military headquarters under hospitals, this kind of thing, or schools, using civilian infrastructure and civilians as shields for the military. Israel's reputation is as of unbridled evil. It has no sympathy anywhere except among the true believers in the West. So, and they are fewer and fewer. And I guess finally I should say that, Mr. Trump is in a bit of trouble. This attack on Iran was supported by about 16% of the American people only. It was opposed by large majorities. And by his own base. He ran on a platform rather like Zelensky. He ran on a platform of making peace. Instead, he's made war. So he has something to answer for. And even if he would anyway, even if other policies that he's adopted had not torn up the world trade system, threatened tariff, caused inflation in the United States, possibly emptied the shop shelves for a great holiday like Christmas. His effort to bludgeon China into conformity has so far completely failed. The last month's trade figures showed a collapse in Chinese exports to the United States, offset almost perfectly by exports to other markets. So China's very vigorous private sector is agile and adjusting to the change. The bad relationship with China has another dimension to it, which is that China has now banned exports of rare earths to military industries. Israel can't produce interceptors without those rare earths from the United States, but the United States imports them all from China, or did. The Chinese are now not selling them. They demand information on the end user of the exports before they will approve it. And they will not approve American military industries, or for that matter, Israeli military industries. So there's a lot of connections between everything going on, and they're not favorable to Mr. Trump and his standing at home or abroad. Of course, he's gone off to Europe now to meet with NATO. He went to Canada to meet with the other members of the G7. He thoroughly split that organization. We'll see whether NATO survives his presence this time.
Here is what the NATO Secretary General said about the confrontation between the United States or NATO with the confrontation with Russia and China on the other side. Here is what he said.
Russia are rapidly, when it comes to Africa and the G5 Sahel, but also generally Africa, mid and north of Africa, the Chinese and the Russians are rapidly gaining influence. So let's not be naive. That's why we have a special representative. I personally have a special representative for the southern neighborhood. For the south, and therefore southern neighborhood and the southern flank. And he is constantly traveling, this guy who is really excellent, traveling all these countries and making sure that wherever NATO can help, we do.
What is the case of Africa? And you mentioned about the difficulties that Donald Trump is facing in terms of in the Middle East and with the case of Ukraine. What's the case of the Africa as the NATO Secretary General is picturing for us?
Well, Mr. Trump, in his previous time in office, denounced what he called shithole countries, which was a very racist comment, primarily about Africa. And it was taken as such. He's seen as a strong leader, but one that is anti-African. He's ended the USAID. He's put that out of business. That was an essential element of American influence in Africa and support for reform, economic reform, and political reform in Africa. And it's gone. In fact, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, appears to be talking about closing a lot of U.S. embassies in Africa. So Mr. Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, is dreaming if he thinks military posture by NATO is an effective counter to the Chinese or the Russians. The Russians provide security services in Africa that the West is either unwilling to provide. France used to provide these to a great extent, but France has made itself unwelcome. And The Russians are there as hired help. They're not there as masters of the countries they garrison. The Chinese are engaged in building infrastructure and investing in the development of raw materials and industrial capacity in Africa. For example, we see in Ghana, which is a major source of cocoa, chocolate, if you will, the Chinese are investing in processing the cocoa in Ghana rather than sending it to Switzerland or Belgium or wherever. So I don't think NATO is an appropriate instrument to exercise influence in Africa. And I think Mr. Rutte is living in the past. There was an argument after the end of the Cold War and the disappearance of the Soviet Union, the enemy that NATO was organized to contain and oppose. There was an argument that went out of area or out of business. In other words, NATO had to go to Afghanistan, had to go to Africa, had to go to West Asia, and so on, to remain relevant. In other words, NATO was to become an auxiliary support force for the American primacy, military primacy in these areas. But I think that is gone, and people in NATO don't agree with that necessarily. But NATO is not welcome in these roles. And here I come back to, the Israeli plan in West Asia, which we've been talking about, which is extended to an effort to engineer regime change or break up Iran, fragment it. And Israelis are now saying, and they were saying when they thought they were winning this battle with Iran, well, the next target is Turkey. Turkey's a NATO member. Things are getting more complicated. And I think Mr. Rutte is not thinking very clearly.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Nice to see you and talk with you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.